Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our webinar on Looking Forward Policy Impacts for 2022. Before we begin, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please notify me by typing your question in the question section of your control panel on the right side of your screen and clicking send. I'll be keeping an eye out for those. We will have a Q&A session following the presentation if time allows. You are welcome to submit a question at any point during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible after the presentation. There will also be a brief survey that will pop up in a new window immediately following the webinar. Please take a couple of minutes to complete it, and we will email you a copy of the presentation. If there are no further questions, I'd like to introduce Sunrun's policy team that'll be delivering this wonderful presentation this morning. And without further ado, Josh, I pass the baton to you.
Excellent, thank you. Let me get the right screen visible for you guys, and we'll get rolling here. So welcome everybody. For those of you around the country tuning in, this is a webinar topic we like to do at least once a year. We feel that there's usually a lot of changes associated with the end of the year. Most of us feel like they want to be really well informed rolling into that new calendar year of what the roadmap looks like as much as we can. I will say usually when we put these together, timing being what it is, between the invites going out and the actual presentation, there's a lot of turnover and turmoil and change in some of these policy outlooks. Not nearly as impactful this year as it has been in years past with some of these last minute changes and curveballs, but we've certainly had a lot over the last couple of months, and that's exactly what we're here to talk to you guys about. So let me throw the agenda up here. I'll briefly introduce today's presenters. We've got a panelist of subject matter experts covering a range of topics here, including federal policy, including trade. We've got some state policy updates for some of our more impactful markets where there's changes coming on the horizon. We'll do a bit of look ahead, including how you guys can get involved at a local or regional level. And then we'll have some times for parting thoughts and questions and answers. So we've got a lot on the docket today. I will get rolling here with some introductions. So our policy team members that are presenting today, Stephen Lassiter, who covers federal policy and trade, Rachel McMahon here locally in California, covering the California market, Kyle Wallace based in the Northeast, who will be presenting on Connecticut, and then Amy Hart will take us home covering Illinois and some of the look ahead we'll be covering. So with that said, Stephen, we're going to open it up to you.
Thanks so much, and thanks for the opportunity to chat with all of you this morning. My name is Stephen Lassiter. I'm a senior manager on Sunrun's policy team, and I work on the federal affairs portfolio. I'm going to walk you through a number of issues that are floating out there, much of it coming to fruition, hopefully, in the very near term. So to start, we'll look to Congress with the Build Back Better Act. As many of you know, the House of Representatives has already passed the Build Back Better Act, and it's now under consideration in the Senate. We will see some changes to the House passed bill in the Senate, and as soon as today, we're expected to see a Senate draft with those changes. There's a lot in here for the solar industry, so I'll walk you through some of the main components and biggest pieces. But before I do, just in terms of timeline, Leader Schumer in the Senate has said that he hopes to pass the Build Back Better Act out of the Senate before Christmas. That would likely be, just before Christmas if they're successful, probably around the 23rd. The House would likely come back and pass it the week after Christmas because a lot of the provisions currently in the bill it's currently drafted to take effect on January 1st. There's a chance that it could roll into next year, despite congressional leaders' best efforts to pass it this year. And if that were the case, it would likely become law early in the new year. As all of you have been reading, there's been a fair amount of drama regarding Senator Manchin's request for changes to the bill, and also some from Senator Sinema and others. But congressional leadership is trying to iron out all those details so that they can get this done before Christmas. So what is in the bill? I think one of the most important things for our industry is a 10-year extension to both the Section 48 ITC and the Section 25D tax credit for cash and loan systems. We are currently at 26%, as you all know, for both credits. This bill would bump that back up to the traditional 30% starting on January 1st. And there's lots of other changes to these tax credits. So there's something called direct pay, for example, that if you don't rely upon tax equity investors to use the ITC, you will be able to receive the ITC via direct payment, which means effectively that the Treasury Department will write you a check after you file your taxes. There's a similar provision for the Section 25D tax credit for that homeowners claim for cash and loan systems. It's called refundability. So basically, same type of thing, but some important distinctions. So refundability for the 25D credit will likely not be provided until 2024, I believe, as it's currently drafted, because Congress wanted to give the IRS as much time as they would require to update the regulations there. And one other string attached, if you're an installer that would like to use direct pay, there are some strings attached, meaning in a couple years, you'll have to start using a specified amount of domestic content in your projects in order to be eligible to claim direct pay. Those requirements don't exist for continued use of the ITC with tax equity partners, as many folks do today. Standalone storage is added to the ITC. Interconnection costs will be included, and MPUs, main panel upgrades, may be included at a later date pending Treasury approval and guidance and regulations that they will put out hopefully early next year, but more likely later next year, regarding the rules for all of these changes to the tax credits. So in other words, if you have to upgrade an electric panel or breaker box as part of your ITC installation, you will now be able to claim the cost of doing so under the tax credit. There's also a number of new bonus credits or adders and the purpose of these is to accomplish specific policy objectives that Congress would like to see fulfilled. So, for example, to promote greater equity, particularly with solar adoption among low and moderate income folks, there will be a 10% adder or bonus credit for projects in certain census tracts. There'll be a 10% adder for, this is separate from the strings attached that I mentioned earlier, but if your project includes a specified amount of domestic content, which is, either all of the iron or steel in your project, or 40% of the total cost of your project comes from domestically manufactured sources, you can claim this additional 10% for domestic content. And then finally, there is an even more generous tax credit of 20% for two types of solar installations. One on low-income multifamily housing. So, we're talking about apartment buildings of a particular type that are affordable multifamily. And then also a 20% adder to the base ITC. So we're talking a 50% tax credit for community solar projects that primarily serve low and moderate income customers. Other programs in Build Back Better, aside from the tax credits, there is a new rebate program for homeowners to install high efficiency electric appliances. There are 4. One is a heat pump space heater, a heat pump water heater, a heat pump clothes dryer, and finally, and I think it's either an electric or an electric induction cooktop or stove. So those 4 appliances, if you're a homeowner and you install them in your house, you can claim a rebate. What does this have to do with the solar industry? Well, there may be an opportunity there pending Department of Energy approval and then making other energy upgrades eligible. You might also be able to claim a rebate for upgrading your main panel or other type of home energy upgrades, subject to DOE approval. Finally, there's a new program that provides production incentives for domestic manufacturing. The purpose here is to try to onshore more, various types of solar energy equipment, whether it's polysilicon wafers, cells, or modules. And this will be an incentive to manufacturers provided on a per unit basis. So if you produce 1 widget, you will be eligible for a specified incentive amount. And for those interested in learning more about this, it was a standalone legislation introduced by Senator Ossoff of Georgia, which has been incorporated into the Build Back Better Act. Next slide. Trade. Obviously, this is a hot topic. I'll tick through these 3 bullets. As you all know, there was a petition before the Department of Commerce recently filed by an anonymous group of domestic solar manufacturers. It basically asked the Department of Commerce to invoke anti-dumping countervailing duty tariffs ranging from 50 to 250% on 3 Southeast Asian countries, which currently, provide the lion's share of imported solar panels into the United States. So this, had Commerce agreed to this petition, it would have imposed tariffs anywhere from 50 to 250% on 70 to 80% of imported solar modules into the United States. Obviously, that would have had an incredibly detrimental impact on the industry. And thankfully, the Commerce Department did reject that petition. They demanded that the petitioners unveil themselves and reveal who they were. The petitioners declined to do so. And so that petition, thankfully, is no longer. Section 201 tariffs. This has been a big issue recently as well. There's several different parts to it. I won't get into the details, but the U.S. International Trade Commission did recently come out and vote and recommend to the U.S. Trade Representative in the White House for an additional 4 years of Section 201 tariffs. They were currently set to expire in February from their current level of 15%. Just this week, the USITC, not to be confused with the investment tax credit, of course, but the U.S. International Trade Commission put out the details of its recommendation. It's 500 pages, but in essence, they say the tariffs should be continued at their current level of 15% for the next 4 years, declining each year by 0.25 percentage point. So post-February, assuming that USTR and the White House accept the USITC's recommendation, we will continue to see tariffs at the 15% level for next year. And then the following year, it would fall to 14.75%, 14.5%, 14.25%. And then after 4 years, they would, phase out unless they're continued once again. But again, this is to be determined by USTR and the White House over the next 2 months or so. USITC's recommendation is not binding, but I would not be surprised if the White House and USTR accept the recommendation and we continue to see these tariffs at their current level for the next few years. Finally, Customs and Border Protection has been enforcing its withhold release order, as you all know, regarding products that use silica from Hoshine, a Chinese silica manufacturer that has been associated with forced labor practices. SIA is working closely with CBP to acknowledge traceability. What do I mean by that? It means that if you're an importer or a solar cell or module manufacturer, and you have basically established internal protocols to trace where all of your inputs are coming from, and you can demonstrate to CBP or others using a third-party auditor that none of your material is coming from the Xinjiang region of China, where these labor practices are occurring, then you will get credit for implementing that traceability protocol and ability to demonstrate to CBP or others that your material is clear of forced labor product. Then the idea, of course, is that you will not be targeted for enforcement if you are taking the steps to demonstrate and prove traceability in your products. This is more of a forward-looking stance or approach that SIA has been taking in its conversations with Customs and Border Protection. For product that has been detained by CBP, I know that a number of importers are going through the process of demonstrating to CBP that their product is free of any material that was derived using forced labor. But that it's unknown how long that process may take, and that's obviously ongoing for those importers who have had goods detained. Lastly, completely different topic. You all are probably familiar with Solar App Plus. This is automated residential software that was developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, NREL, which is, of course, a part of the U.S. Department of Energy. It is free for any local government and building department to adopt so that they can expedite their increasing number of solar permits coming through the door, and it will not be as much of a burden for them. And obviously, this has many benefits to the entire industry if you can essentially get a solar permit application back instantaneously so you can go to work and do your job. To date, 2,800 permits have been completed by Solar App. That's from a handful of local governments who have adopted Solar App so far. There are many more local governments in the pipeline, 311, that have reached out to NREL and have said, I'm interested in adopting Solar App in my town or city or county. We have more federal funding coming down the pike for Solar App. Congress should appropriate $50 million for solar soft cost reduction generally. A fraction of that will go toward Solar App and hopefully encourage more local governments to adopt it in the coming year. And finally, the industry and CALSA and others have been helping other solar associations in other states listed at the bottom of this slide, basically to run campaigns encouraging high volume jurisdictions in their states to adopt Solar App Plus, so that we won't see some of the backlogs that we've seen in certain jurisdictions across the country. Josh, I think that's it for me. I've consumed way too much time. I apologize, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end of the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephen. We will keep rolling here. Rachel, over to you.
Hi, everyone. This is Rachel McMahon. I'm a director on Sunrun's policy team and happy to be talking with you today. So now for California. So as we all know, the biggest issue right now for our sector in California is NEM 3.0, or the second NEM successor tariff. There has been a ton of work ongoing within the formal CPUC, that's California Public Utilities Commission proceeding, as well as external advocacy to the legislature, commission, and governor's office. As of right now, we're awaiting a proposed decision from the CPUC, which will be released sometime next week. The solar industry throughout this proceeding has advocated for a reasonable glide path, so gradual reduction on export compensation, and lock-in rate for 20 years, which has existed in the past, of course, no fixed charges, and encouraging storage deployment along with solar. Other parties, including investor-owned utilities, so PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric, have proposed high fixed charges, like very high fixed charges, based on system size, including for consumption on site, an immediate drop in export compensation to avoided cost, which generally speaking is around 60 to 70% reduction of the export rate today, and a shorter legacy period, including for NEM 2.0 customers. So all of which taken together will seriously handicap the solar market in California. So this summer, solar advocates successfully stopped a legislative proposal by a very powerful member of the state assembly, which would have directed the PUC to reduce or eliminate NEM immediately. There's been an incredible show of support for solar. So cities, mayors, companies, environmental groups, members of Congress, and hundreds of thousands of customers have registered their support for rooftop solar through letters, petitions, rallies, testimony at each and every CPUC business meeting leading up to the proposed decision. It's not too late to show your support. It can be done by joining the Solar Rights Alliance and the California Solar and Storage Association, and by signing the Solar Rights Petition. The links for all are on this slide. And also, a new development as of yesterday is that the presiding commissioner on NEM is actually leaving the commission. So she's been appointed by the Biden administration to lead US EPA Region 9. And so it's possible, like even given, it's possible all of this advocacy that has, that has gone into this case and all of this work, we could wind up with a major reversal in the NEM case. So stay tuned and please do, sign up and show your support if you haven't already. Next slide. Okay, so beyond NEM, there's a ton of policy development ongoing. So the most relevant short-term items are both licensing requirements for solar installers and grid services programs that are going live in 2022. So starting with licensing requirements, in July of this year, the California State Licensing Board issued a ruling out of nowhere, making solar installers with C46 licenses ineligible to install solar paired batteries, and requiring such work to be performed by C10 license holders only. This was a backroom deal with labor unions. In September 2021, the California Solar and Storage Association sued the board and sought an injunction. And in response, the licensing board voted to stay their decision pending litigation, meaning that the original ruling has no effect. And the CSLB also established a rulemaking process to develop a compromise approach with the decision targeted for March 2022. The lawsuit is still not yet resolved, but so far positive developments there. And finally, grid services. So in addition to preserving our traditional value by defending net metering, there has also been a lot of work into grid services programs over the course of really the last 5 or so years. So how customer batteries can provide benefits to system reliability, the distribution system, and local resiliency during climate events, while also providing critical services to the customer. And that work will continue in 2022 and beyond. But I wanted to highlight 2 statewide grid services pilots that will be available in 2022. The first is an energy-only reliability program that was just adopted by the Public Utilities Commission last week. It's called the Emergency Load Reduction Program, and it will be available to investor and utility and CCA residential customers, and that's for both standalone batteries as well as electric vehicles, starting in May 2022. And it's a $2 per kilowatt hour payment on dispatch, and all systems will be dispatched for at least 20 hours a summer season. And summer season is May through October. The second is a pilot procurement process called the Partnership Pilot, and it's designed specifically for residential customers to provide distribution deferral. So distribution companies have defined candidate locations, and customers will be able to sign up if they are interconnected to the candidate locations, of course, starting early next year. Going forward, our main focus is a new resiliency reliability program to pick up from the self-generation incentive program, which has been the primary driver of solar storage incentives and storage adoption in the state. Distributed energy resources providing reliability capacity to the grid, and whole building electrification. And that wraps it up for me. And with that, I'll hand it off to Kyle.
Thank you. So I'll be covering some updates in Connecticut. We've had a very active 2021, and we look forward to a very active 2022 as some of these new programs are implemented. First, just wanted to highlight a couple of key solar bills that passed here in 2021. First was one that helped resolve inconsistent property tax treatment, particularly for third-party owned solar systems. And so that resolved an ongoing issue that's been several years in the making. So that was a pretty big win. Second, they also passed a bill that set a 1 gigawatt of energy storage target by 2030 and required the Utility Commission, PURA, to work on developing programs for residential and commercial customers to help meet that target. And then there's a third that I didn't list, but I think it's a little more nuanced, but also really important, is that they changed the definition of residential customer for eligibility for these net metering successor tariffs to include certain multifamily properties as well. So that is one of the key pieces in 2022 we expect PURA to take up. So on the regulatory side, I'm going to be covering first the changes to the net metering program, and then I'll cover a high-level overview of the energy storage incentive program that will start next year as well. There's a lot of information and nuance here, so I'm just going to be doing some of the high-level overview, but I included a link there to Eversource's website that has quite a bit of information about how to actually apply for the program, some of the new paperwork, how to size these systems, and some of the metering and other key details. So highly recommend you check that out. In short, we were able to get a decision from PURA in February that essentially retained a net metering value for residential customers. By law, that they are required to have a netting tariff and a buy-all tariff. So that is new for residential customers. They'll have those two options. The netting tariff will operate largely as net metering has in Connecticut, with a couple of key differences in that any monthly excess generation from a solar system will be credited forward as a monetary value rather than a kilowatt hour credit to the next month. And there is no longer an annual true up where those credits expire. So that's one of the key pieces there, but it's still, those credits will be at the retail rate. And will be netted monthly. The second option with the buy-all tariff is a fixed rate. You can see in the table there of 29.43 cents per kilowatt hour for all production from the system for 20 years. It's a flat known value, and the system, importantly, will be designed in a way so that it feeds directly to the grid rather than serving the customer's home. And so that tariff will not be as advantageous for customers who want to add storage either today or in the future. So that's just one key difference there. On top of maintaining this net metering value, there are a couple adders that are important that are essentially bring the RCIP incentive program that was separate from net metering and combine it with net metering. In the Eversource territory, there will be a REC incentive rate of 3.18 cents per kilowatt hour that will be applied to all production for 20 years and paid to the system owner or their designee. There will not be a REC adder in United Illuminating. And the reason for this is they go through an annual rate setting process to set these REC incentive and other adder values. And because of UI's higher net metering value, they determined that for solar customers to receive a reasonable rate of return as required by law, there was no need for a REC incentive. So that the Eversource value is intended to try to equalize the value for all customers in Connecticut, regardless of utility territory. The other two adders are, one is the low income adder, which is customer based. If they're eligible for certain low income programs, then they qualify for this 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour adder that can be stacked on top of the rec adder. And then there's a distressed municipality adder, which is a location based adder for any system that is located in towns that are defined by the state as being economically distressed. And that's a list that you can find on the Eversource website. So overall, it's a good structure with net metering equivalent value with these additional adders and added customer flexibility with the netting tariff and the buy all options. One other key piece with that annual rate setting process that I talked about, over time, if the net metering value exceeds what has been defined as a reasonable rate of return, which is between 9 and 11% in PURA's decision, then a non-bypassable charge would be phased in for new customers starting in those program years. It's not retroactive, but we won't see that until 2023. The utilities will be filing some proposals of how this charge could work in January of 2022, and we expect that's something PURA will decide on early next year. Next slide, please. So the energy storage program, which was required from that legislation that passed, this is actually something that PURA was ahead of the game on. They started working on this last year when the bill looked like it was going to pass in the 2020 session before COVID derailed the whole legislative session. So they were already kind of ahead of the game. And so after the bill passed this year, they were able to issue a final order establishing these programs shortly after. It's a really complicated program. There's still a lot of work going on in the details of how you apply the specific program requirements. We're expecting more documentation on that later this month. And then the actual ability to apply for this program won't be available till January through the Connecticut Green Bank. So I would highly recommend following the Connecticut Green Bank as they'll be sending out information on this. They have a webinar next week on December 16th at 10 a.m. Eastern for any interested contractors. And they will also be putting together a listserv for interested contractors. So I'm just going to be giving the high overview of the structure. There's a lot of details in this program. One of the notable pieces is this program ties together an upfront incentive for energy storage with ongoing performance payments for 10 years and kind of combines them into one. And they do that to try to maximize the ratepayer value, which is required by the law that these programs are cost effective for ratepayers. So with that 1 gigawatt target, there's a portion of that which will be met through front of the meter storage, and then a portion for behind the meter. And that's what you see in this table 1 with the deployment targets that they're expecting for this program, broken out by residential and commercial, and then also in the 3-year kind of program windows that they're structuring this program in. So you can see it's 50 megawatts for residential and commercial for this initial 3-year part of the program, but ultimately they do want to get to 580 megawatts by 2030. The upfront incentives, you can see those in tables 3 and 4 on the bottom there, starting at $200 a kilowatt hour of nameplate capacity for residential and small commercial, and then large commercial at 175 and industrial at 100. And then similar to the net metering structure, there are distressed municipality and low income adders for the storage incentive, which track with the same eligibility as the net metering program. So you can see it's a fairly lucrative upfront incentive that'll be worth a couple $1,000s depending on the battery type. And in exchange for receiving this rebate, the customer's battery will be required to discharge in what they call passive dispatch windows throughout the summer weekdays. This will be a 5-hour window from 3 to 8, where the battery will have to discharge 80% of its usable capacity. just on a set schedule, and that provides the ratepayer value, which allows them to provide this upfront rebate. Additionally, there's the performance-based incentive part of this, which is very similar to the Connected Solutions programs that Eversource and National Grid run in the Northeast, primarily Massachusetts, where the utilities will be sending day-ahead signals, for targeted dispatch windows between 2 and 4 hours, during forecasted peak demand periods, and then this active dispatch window will essentially override the passive, so you don't end up having to do both in the same day as one or the other for those summer days. And basically, they'll take your average performance over a season. So if you, on average, per event, discharge 3 kilowatts per hour with your battery, then you'd be eligible for that $3 or 3 kilowatts times $200 per kilowatt for a $600 per year summer season incentive payment. And for this is a 10-year program, which I think is really important because it allows the full ratepayer value to be captured in those later years, because how it's structured with the years 1 through 5 having higher incentive value and years 6 through 10 a bit lower, that really adds up with the ratepayer value. So that's the real kind of high-level overview of the deployment targets and incentive values, and a little primer on what the operational requirements will be. Once again, highly recommend staying in tune with what the Green Bank's putting out. The last piece I want to just cover here is that you may be thinking, well, that's a lot of discharging from the battery, 80% under passive. What's the value to customers? Between the upfront rebate and the performance payments, that can cover hopefully most of, if not all of the battery's costs over that 10-year period. And additionally, there's a couple of protections for the customers in the event that there's a forecasted storm. No events will be called within 48 hours prior to that storm, and no events will resume until after the grid is fully back to normal, so that the customers have the full backup power during those type of weather events. Additionally, during weekends and during the spring, fall, and winter, the battery will not be required to discharge, and so for most of the year, they will also have full backup capabilities. So it's trying to balance that customer value while still providing significant ratepayer benefit, which allows for these incentives in the first place. So it's a very interesting program, and we're excited for it to open up January of next year. And that's all that I have, and I'll pass it to Amy.
Great. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar on this Friday. I'm going to give a couple of slides on Illinois, and then we will wrap up and open it for questions that you may have on what we presented. So for Illinois, this has been a number of years in the making, but finally this past fall, the legislature did pass the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, as it's known for short. It is basically the follow-up to FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act, and it builds on a number of the programs that were created back in 2016, 2017. So for those of you who already do work in Illinois, it's going to look very familiar and similar to what you had experienced through the Illinois Adjustable Block Program, with some important tweaks and new opportunities and rules as well. But for those of you who have been in this space in Illinois, I want to thank all of you for your help and patience. This has been a long haul to get a real comprehensive piece of legislation over the finish line in Illinois. The solar programs are a small part of what was in that legislation, and so that's what took so long in Illinois. It included everything but the kitchen sink in that legislation. But specifically today, just wanted to focus on a few highlights on the solar program, that it does provide a stable future for solar through at least 2030, with funding through 2030 to build utility scale wind and solar, distributed generation. So that means community solar, commercial projects, nonprofits, and residential. And so we will have additional funds that will be available to make sure that we hit the targets that were set out, which is 40% renewable energy, renewable electricity by 2030. And so what that means is that we have probably a minimum of 75 megawatts of incentives for each block. For those of you who are familiar with the different blocks, there's small DG, large DG, and community solar. And so that will continue. It's going to be annual instead of always open. So we will have a certain amount of capacity every year. First and foremost, probably the most important thing that folks are wondering is what's happening with the wait list and when will those incentives be available. So the IPA is opening, and the IPA is short for the Illinois Power Agency. You'll see on the slides the website illinoisabp.com. That is your go-to place for all information, and there's a lot of information coming out weekly about this. But the IPA will be opening up new blocks this month on December 15th. They will be addressing the wait list first. So the IPA had been addressing the wait list for community solar, large DG, and small DG, because if you're in Illinois, you know we had run out of funding, but they maintained that wait list. But then there will also be the additional block that opens up for 2022. They already have the set prices for those RECs until they have an approved long-term plan. So we do not have to wait for the long-term plan to be approved in the middle of 2022. They are going to be opening up REC incentive blocks on December 15th. All of the prices for all of the different categories in the different utility territories, all of that is on the website, which is illinoisabp.com. I didn't want to go through necessarily every category for you. One note to call out, though, before I switch to the next slide is small DG is now considered 25 kW and below. It used to be 10 kW. So small DG category is 25 kW and below, and then large DG is 25 kW up to 5 megawatts for projects. And then community solar is community solar up to 5 megawatts. So they may have some subgroups in the large DG, but those rules are forthcoming. Next slide, please, Josh. Some other pieces to note in Illinois. So again, we'll have a long-term plan in mid-2022. So there'll be new rules. But in the meantime, we'll have these blocks that open. There are new categories for REC incentives. There's going to be equity RECs, and then also a specific schools category. So if you work in that space doing projects on schools, there's a separate block for that. And again, those will open up on December 15th with all of the rules located on the website. Illinois Solar for All is expanded, which is the low income program that has incentives, additional incentives for single family, multifamily, nonprofits that serve low income communities, as well as community solar. So if you've been thinking about taking a look at that, please do, because there's expanded budgets in the Illinois Solar for All program. I do want to make a note, as those of you in the industry know, that in Illinois with the IPA, consumer protection is still a top priority. So expect all of the disclosures, marketing rules, all of those protections to continue. They may be tweaked a bit, but operate as we all have in the past. Some other advancements. Residential retail NEM, for those of you who work in the residential space, it used to be up to a 5% threshold. That has been changed. So for residential retail NEM, that is now extended to a date certain. So in every utility, Ameren and ComEd, it goes through December 31st, 2024. There will be a new NEM tariff that will allow sizing to future electrical loads. We expect that filing by the end of the year. We've got some caps on small level systems for interconnection fees and an improved process. One item to call out, which we don't have any details on yet, is the storage incentive. Part of the legislation includes a storage incentive. Utilities have to file their proposal by the end of 2021, which means it would launch in 2022. In general, it's an upfront incentive, and the customer would then enroll in one of the utilities' peak pricing programs to be able to get a benefit from that storage. The commission will also be doing a study and developing additional storage programs in the long term, but this will spur growth in the storage space. One last slide on Illinois, please. The one thing I did want to call out for Illinois is that there are some different labor requirements as a result of the legislation that you all want to be aware of. Prevailing wage will be required on almost all solar projects. This is new from anywhere around the country, so it's something, you know, everyone will need to learn. Exempt are single family homes regardless of the size, multifamily regardless of the size, and then house of worships. Or houses of worship where the capacity would not exceed 100 kW. What I will say is the Illinois Power Agency, in fact, this morning just sent out an update on what the prevailing wage rules may be, how to handle that, how it may impact REC prices. So if that impacts your projects, please make sure you are following along with the Illinois Adjustable Block Program at that website, attending the webinars, making sure that you know when that will be implemented and takes effect. The other piece that's coming next year, this does not apply immediately, but there will be equity requirements, which 10% of the workforce, whether you're an approved vendor or a designee, which means, you know, you're installing projects that are funded through the incentive program or work with an approved vendor, your workforce must be what's defined as an equitable eligible person or an eligible contractor that's based on their location. So are they located in an environmental justice community? So I just throw that out there knowing that there are more details on what that means, what the maps are, what the rules are. That will be coming by mid-2022, and I'm sure we'll be providing those on a future webinar update for you all. So my parting piece in Illinois, follow the Adjustable Block Program website. If you have not joined the Illinois Solar Energy Association, please do that, where they offer lots of webinars to and input into these programs to make sure it works for your business. Next slide, please, Josh. And I think before we wrap up, we just wanted to let you know as we look ahead to 2022, we only have a few weeks left of this year. Please know, you know, Rachel and Stephen and Kyle on this call, but, you know, as well as part of our other colleagues in the policy world, we work within the industry across the country, really driving policy from a number of different aspects: regulatory, legislative, partnerships, outside games. So we work in the regulatory space, as Rachel was mentioning, with NEM 3.0, legislative. We also work within trade associations and really building markets and expanding them. And so you can see some of the priority areas we already know that we're going to be focused on in 2022. Some of it's maintaining strong markets that you are all active in: Florida, California, Arizona. Some of it is building opportunities in New Mexico, Michigan, but really just in Texas. So really happy to be working with all of you. Next slide, Josh. I think the one thing that we would ask of you, if you haven't connected already to trade associations, please do so. There's a couple of organizations that are really helpful from an advocacy side of things, of getting our employees active, getting and telling those stories, getting our customers active, is the Alliance for Solar Choice, as well as Solar United Neighbors. So I would encourage all of you just to become members of those groups, you know, be able to help support the grassroots advocacy that really helps show that people want a clean energy future that is on rooftops, on properties that's customer driven across the country. The top one's probably the most timely request, which is take a few, take 30 seconds, take a minute to record a short video on why we need the Build Back Better Act this month. And there's instructions on how to submit the 30-second videos. It's just telling why this is important for you. And that can go a long way to get some movement this year. So thank you all for joining. Josh, I think I'll turn it back to you to see if there's any questions that folks may have on the states or the topics that we covered, or any others as we look towards 2022.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy, and thanks to our other presenters, Kyle, Rachel, and Stephen. At this point, we will open it up for questions. I will leave it on this slide just to kind of remind you guys of some of those advocacy efforts in which we need your help. Erin, any
Yes.
good questions that have come in from the audience?
Yeah, we got a couple. This is from, hopefully I'm going to say his name properly, Erez Delef. Will bifacial panels remain exempted from the Section 201 tariff moving forward?
Great question, and the short answer is yes, but there may be an asterisk on that because the government, DOJ, still has about a month to challenge a recent ruling by Judge Katzman of the Court on International Trade. So as of now, absolutely, the bifacial exemption will remain in effect and should remain in effect post the Section 201 extension in February. But that there's a chance that could change. I don't think it's a great chance, but hopefully we'll continue to see the bifacial exemption intact for years to come.
Good to hear.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Our next question comes from Sean Seipel. Is the federal direct pay to go to installers or the customers?
Yeah,
And then
it's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I'm trying to determine if this is part of, he has another piece here, is commercial direct. Excuse me, and is commercial direct pay coming before residential? You mentioned 2024.
Yes, so commercial direct pay with the ITC, it takes effect next year. Residential, in terms of the Section 25D homeowner credit, is currently slated to kick in at the beginning of 2024. That could change based on the Senate draft coming out today, but in the House passed version, refundability for the 25D credit begins in 2024. Direct pay for the Section 48 ITC, for businesses that claim the tax credit, it takes effect starting next year.
Awesome, thank you. And that actually, it looks like for now that concludes the questions that we got. We did get a lot of comments coming in though, just complimenting this webinar. So I want to take the opportunity to thank all of our panelists and our policy team here at Sunrun for such a wonderful and informative presentation. I will continue to monitor questions, and if anybody has any lingering ones that pop up post-webinar, please feel free to email us and we'll make sure to get those answered. But I think that will conclude our presentation today. So thank you for everyone who attended, and thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to give such a wonderful presentation this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day and weekend.
Bye, guys. Take care.